Chapter 5. Ryan. He stopped in front of me. He had brown eyes like the girls, but his were red and swollen at the corners. He looked at me for a moment, then his right hand came up. My whole body flinched. He was going to whack me. But instead he took off his glasses and rubbed his face. "You're the driver?" I couldn't trust my voice. I nodded. "What's your name, son?" I hate people calling me son, but this guy could call me anything he wanted. "Ryan O'Carroll." He flopped down in the chair, as if all the strength had suddenly drained out of him. I slowly sat too. "I'm really sorry." My voice sounded thick. Her father just nodded. I made myself speak again. "How is she?" I couldn't say her name aloud. I didn't have the right to. He sighed. "I don't know. Nobody knows. She can't talk or move, and they don't know if she can hear us. She's having a CT scan, a brain scan, soon. Her mother's with her." "We weren't boozed," I told him. I wasn't watching properly, but we weren't boozed. He looked up at me then. It was the look I'd been scared of getting, and I felt my guts go heavy again. "What did you come here for?" I stared at the floor. I had to. There was silence for maybe 5 seconds. I knew he was watching me. "Okay, son," he said finally. "You better go now. I don't want Tara's mum to see you. She's not really with it just now." He paused, and his eyes went angry suddenly. "I don't much want to talk to you either." I stood. My legs felt heavy and clumsy. The woman at the counter smiled at me. She wouldn't if she knew. The girl's father spoke. "What's your last name again?" He was still in the chair. "O'Carroll," I said. He just nodded. Out in the car park, John had his head back on the seat and his eyes closed. I left him to it for a few minutes and wandered around the parked cars. Why me? I kept thinking again. Why me? Vince was the one who'd been sodding around. Plus, she'd come out so suddenly onto the road. It wasn't bloody fair if everyone was blaming me. I kicked a stone so hard it flew through the air and wanged off a flash red sports job parked near the exit. Nobody was in it. I couldn't have given a stuff if they were. After a few more minutes, I went back to our car. Testing of pupil response to light continued hourly. A CT scan was made to identify damaged areas. It was agreed that an ECG, electrocardiogram test, would be carried out if there was any indication the heart had been damaged by the accident impact. 16 hours after admission, the patient began showing signs of arrhythmia, irregular heartbeat. This was attributed to paralyzing drug being used to prevent movements that might cause spiking, sudden blood pressure rises inside the brain. The drug was discontinued and close monitoring of her heart functions continued. Ryan. I cleared up Peel's car when we got home. I stuck the bottles in our rubbish and tidied the tools away into the boot. I vacuumed most of the gunge off the floor and washed the outside. Anything to take my mind off what might be happening at the hospital. John said, "Thanks, mate," and headed off to check in at work. He can't afford any time away. He and Mum are still paying off all sorts of bills. I was winding up the hose when the phone rang inside. I stood there, not moving, till Mum came out on the porch. "It's the police, love." Oh, shit, no. Please, no. But Mum was already saying, "It's not that, Ryan, it's not that." She tried a wobbly smile. "They need you to come in and make a full statement. Add anything to what you said last night." She came over and put her arms around me. The hose dripped on my sneakers. "You're allowed to have someone there since you're not 17 yet. I'm coming with you." We had to take a taxi into town. I saw Mum hand over $20 to the driver. I was costing her in all sorts of ways. We walked into a brown-floored foyer where a scruffy guy leaned on the counter, going, "Nobody told me I had to, eh? Nobody told me." The policewoman he was talking to was the one from last night. She saw us, went, "Just a minute, Reg," and said, "Mrs. O'Carroll?" If you'd like to take a seat, Sergeant Bramling will be with you. Mum's chin was up and her mouth tight. We'd hardly sat down when a door opened and another cop appeared. You folks like to come through here? He led us down a corridor and into a small bare room. Green plaster walls, wooden table, 3 school-type chairs. I'm Carl Bramling, he said. He shook hands with Mum, which I could tell she hadn't expected. Make yourselves comfortable, if you can, on these chairs. He was middle-aged and going bald, except for the uniform with a couple of metal ribbons on it. He looked like a school teacher. How are you feeling, Ryan? Managed any sleep? I hadn't expected that either. I mumbled something. He sat opposite us. The table had names and graffiti on it. West Side, Homies Sucks. The cop, the sergeant, set 2 printed forms down in front of him. Now, folks. His voice was calm, in control. The purpose of this visit is so we can get a formal statement from Ryan to add to last night's report from the officer at the scene. He nodded at one of the forms, already covered in handwriting. Mrs. O'Carroll, you're welcome to ask anything. Ryan? He looked at me. Anything you say will be taken down and may be used in evidence. You understand that? I understood it, and it scared the crap out of me. The sentence about anything you say sounded so pathetic in movies, but not now. For the next half hour, he took me over what had happened last night. Christ, only last night. Checking the other cop's report, writing on the second form, asking me question after question. Mum sat, gripping her bag. Why did I have the car? I asked him to go to the supermarket, Mum said quickly. It wasn't totally true. The sergeant nodded and wrote it down. Had I driven anywhere else? I told him about Video Easy. And where were Ash and Vince, was it? Sitting when we started driving home. Were they fooling about or anything? Yeah, I thought. Where was my best mate anyway? Why hadn't he been in touch? He was the one who should be here. I tried to pull my head together as the cop started talking again. Remember, we're after the full picture, he said. We're not trying to blame your friends, but perhaps they distracted you without meaning to. Suddenly, I felt so shattered that I just couldn't be bothered. It was my fault, I said. Mum went, Ryan, and I shook my head at her. The cop watched, and I knew he was missing something. Did you see the girl before the car hit her? I couldn't speak for a moment. Her face was there again, hair swinging as she turned to stare at us. Ash yelled out. I turned round and she was right in front. Mum squeezed my hand. The sergeant kept writing. We went on through my breaking, the search for the girl, stopping the guy with the cell phone, the ambulance. When we finished, I was cold and shivering, but the feeling of things flying apart had faded a bit. I read the statement through and tried to believe it was about me. I signed it, so did Mum. Okay, the sergeant said. Now, Ryan, there are 2 separate offences we're looking at here. You've admitted carrying passengers on a restricted licence, so you'll be sent an infringement notice for that. There's a fine, usually about $400, and you'll get demerit points on your licence. You can pay the fine at a bank, by the way. I snorted. I couldn't help it. The cop gave me a half grin. Bit weird, isn't it? Sergeant Bramling? Mum's voice was tight. What about charges over the accident? The cop gazed down at his forms. We have to wait, Mrs. O'Carroll. It depends on what happens to Tara. The poky little room was silent. Outside, feet moved along the corridor. Someone laughed in another room, in another world. The sergeant looked at me, and I thought of a school teacher again. Try to go on with things normally, Ryan. You got any sports or hobbies? Taekwondo. He nodded. Put some time into that. Keep yourself occupied. It's not going to help if we end up with 2 casualties. Mum thanked him, so did I. Listening to my voice sounded like someone else's. We caught a bus home. Mum made me drink a cup of coffee and eat half a sandwich. Then I went out and walked around the streets till it was nearly 3:20 p.m, and I turned for home in case I met anyone I knew coming out of school. Friday afternoon, I realised. Best time of the week. School over, the weekend ahead, mates to hang out with, DVDs to watch, chicks to talk about, even wheels to drive. But not this Friday. Maybe never any Friday again.